Hi, I am Manuel Androgué and I do classical taekwondo. Welcome to episode number 2 of the 9 videos that comprise the Korean kicking project. You will find very precise technical and cultural information that hopefully will be helping you with your training. Please leave your comments below, like, subscribe, and share. I will be checking for your feedback. Although each episode in the series focuses on one particular aspect, I strongly recommend that you watch the preceding videos, because in each of them there is content or information that will help you to fully understand what's coming next. In this episode, we will overview the history of the development of Korean kicking skills. We will be building from things that are fairly well known in martial arts circles to others that are quite uncommon. This information will go deeper in the next episodes. So, if you are passionate about the martial arts, this is a must-see video. These are the contents of episode number 2. The practical side of knowledge of history, the 2 fighting scenarios of unarmed martial arts, the idea of evolution when it comes to martial arts, how certain karate morphed into taekwondo, how Korean kicking skills developed, explained in 6 stages, and finally the conclusions. You can jump to each of these chapters using the description box below. First, I want to make a very short comment about Korean names in this series to avoid confusions. Here you will find many Korean names that you may know, but written in a different way. There are several ways to carry the Korean alphabet, which is called Hangul, into Roman letters. Instead of choosing one consistent method throughout the whole series, I have chosen to respect the way names are known in the West. Just one example. In Korean, there are 2 sounds similar to letter O, one higher than the other, both found in the name taekwondo. The high one, O, taekwon, is sometimes written with letter O, as taekwondo. Other times is written as E-O, as in the name of Master Lee Chong-seo, which is written Lee Chong-seo. And the third possibility is to write it with an U, as in Chong-do-kwan or Mu-do-kwan. It is common that brothers spell their same surname differently in English. In Korean, the same letter is always pronounced identically. Tangsudo and Taekwondo are derivatives of the early version of Korean karate. So when it comes to kicking, there are at least 3 different types of Taekwondo out there, all mixed up. It is very important that you don't get confused with the idea of style, because except for tiny details you should conform to when competing in forms in tournaments, there is no specific ITF way of kicking or WT or Tangsudo way of kicking. Any differences that you may find are negligible. However, the evolution of Korean kicking determined that each generation of practitioners performed their kicks slightly different, and to this date, such different generational layers remain and sometimes confuse students. I insist that you focus on the generation to which that kick belongs and not the organization of the person showing them. As history goes, Taekwondo has a major part of its origin in karate, so the comparison is simply unavoidable. Koreans changed the mechanics they received from karate, and by the 1970s that resulted in a kicking version with long, incredibly powerful and beautiful motions. In connection with karate kicks, note that if the Okinawans or Japanese did not develop kicks similar to the Koreans, it's because they probably didn't need them. They found other ways to solve their combat needs. In the 1950s Korea, the martial arts evolutionary stage was ripe and the circumstances were adequate for those kicks to appear. Koreans had certain body culture or idea of motion and they applied it to the mechanics of their kicks. Now, before we get into kicks, let's review some essential ideas. Weaponless martial arts are a modern phenomenon. Until the 20th century, martial arts education included empty hand training, fighting with weapons, and fighting against weapons. When in the 1900s bare hand training became isolated and weaponless martial arts were born, two different trends emerged. On the one hand, some systems became protection-oriented fighting arts, which were the skills we associate with bodyguards. On the other hand, other schools adopted the confrontation or duel-oriented one-on-one fighting, sometimes called consensual fighting, which is the skill sets we typically find in professional fighters. Protection or one-on-one confrontation are conceptual scenarios and do not exclude each other, although they have different implications. A kick with the toes to the testicles, how to escape from a lapel grab, or a double Nelson hold, or learning how to twist someone's fingers fall within the concept of protection. Protection schools focus a lot on dirty maneuvers which are collected in forms. McCarthy Sensei's explanation is that Okinawan karate forms originally codified responses against habitual acts of physical violence, packing them together for solo training purposes. On the other hand, facing head-on a trained fighter means being able to adapt and unleash strikes to avoid getting hit, moving around, using timing and distance skills. All those are perfected in the confrontation type of training. There is simply no other way to learn those skills. In general, it is safe to say that the confrontation school will focus on greater technical and tactical proficiency in a relatively narrow and predictable fighting context, while the protection school assumes a higher level of uncertainty or unpredictability in the context. You don't know when, where, against how many, or what type of violence you will be facing, and thus the response will be less technical and more strategic or conceptual. Both tool sets are necessary to face real violence, and in the past martial arts mixed elements of both types in their systems. It is actually unwise to be 100% knowledgeable in one area and a total ignorant in the other. Your personal safety demands that none of those baskets is completely empty. Again, that distinction is mostly theoretical, but it helps to understand. For example, HapKiDo is oriented to protection skills, while Taekwondo to confrontation skills. But those are just tendencies, not limitations. The Korean and Japanese martial arts that we know today did not exist before the 20th century. When Jiu-Jitsu was no longer needed as a backup for the battlefield samurai, the extraordinary Kano Jigoro undertook its technical refinement. He learned 4 different Jiu-Jitsu systems, and by 1882 he established his Kodokan Jiu-Jitsu, later called Judo, school. Similarly, during the 20th century, karate and taekwondo proponents narrowed the scope of their training, specializing in strikes and kicks more than in actual responses to threats of violence. Such narrowing of the scope led to a deeper understanding of the chosen skill, and that led to substantial progress in these areas for the benefit of martial arts as a whole. Now, we might want to ask, which is a point where specialization in a martial art skill becomes over-specialization? Over-specialization happens when, in the process of developing an ability, other skills are completely forsaken, and as a result, such martial art no longer serves well enough for the purpose of self-protection. Evolution is a much heard but tricky word. People used to tie it to improvement, although it more precisely means variation for a successful adaptation to new circumstances. At the turn of the 21st century, karate and taekwondo have changed to survive in the modern world of supply and demand. No one can deny that Taekwondo or Karate have evolved, but some question whether they have improved. This series is about that. Much has been written about how Karate evolved into Taekwondo. Now I will discuss a part of it, and the rest will be addressed in the last episode. The first 5 Karate schools in Korea started in 1944 to 1946. 4 of them were led by instructors who had come from Japan. In the next years, some of those schools, called Kwan, split, and the arrival of new Koreans coming from Japan also increased the number. The name of what they taught was Tang-Soo-Do or Kong-Soo-Do, which are the 2 Korean translations for Karate-Do. Those founding instructors were in their mid-20s, except for Chung Do-Kwan, founder, who was 37 years old by then. They were all essentially teaching the methods taught by Gijin Funakoshi in Japan. Although one of the pioneers had practiced with Toyama Sensei and had a strong Kung Fu background and called his art Kwonbop. In their training, Koreans very soon started to consider sparring as important as forms. Destroying hard objects with their hands and feet became a frequent and objective way to test their skill, and soon sparring, forms, and breaking became the ruling trinity of Korean Karate. The Korean War entered into truce in 1953, and South Korea increased its militarization. Korean Karate was introduced in the army and gradually expanded as thousands of young men were drafted into military instruction. In 1959, the new Taekwondo name that General Choi had been pushing since 1955 was finally adopted by all schools. As we shall see in the next section, by 1960, Korean Karate had undergone significant transformation, and at that year, a military coup took up the government. 2 years later, Korea started to dispatch troops to Vietnam. Korea became the largest foreign military force, second to the United States, sending 300,000 troops along 10 years. Among them, 647 Taekwondo instructors were deployed, and the High Command took martial art training very seriously. The 9th White Horse Division, the 2nd Blue Dragon Marines Division, and the Tigers Division were composed by Taekwondo or HapKiDo black belts that kept up their training even on the field. The first Taekwondo championship was organized in 1962 in the military school, and immediately Taekwondo competition became part of the National Sports Festival, a milestone as governmental recognition. So Vietnam deployment and competition Taekwondo started on that same year, 1962. At that point, the Korean Taekwondo Association was in charge of developing competition within Korea, with crucial achievements that I will describe in the next section, while General Choi was focusing on sending instructors abroad to spread Taekwondo worldwide. In 1965, General Choi made a first promotion to Europe, the Middle East, Singapore, and Malaysia, surrounded by young instructors who destroyed bricks and flew around spinning and going airborne, smashing objects. This is all very well described in Alex Gillies' book A Killing Art. Most of the members of the team had served in Vietnam as combat instructors and were also sparring champions: Han Cha-kyo, Choi Chang-gun, Park Jong-soo, Kong Yong-il, and Kim Jong-chan. Slowly, Taekwondo was becoming known outside Korea. By 1971, the Korean government had understood the potential for national promotion, and General President Park Chung-hee declared it a national sport, seizing full control of Taekwondo. In the late 60s, a young, skilled Wing Chun Kung Fu instructor called Bruce Lee was making a sensation in the United States martial arts scene. Wing Chun is a front-oriented, squared, short-range combat method based on efficiency in the use of fists and open hands with a very practical approach that just uses a few kicks below the waist. Wing Chun's range, body position and tools are very different from Taekwondo, but both were similar in their pragmatic approach to succeed in combat. In 1966, Taekwondo instructor Ri Jung-gu, the famous Jun Ri, impressed Bruce with his kicks, and they became friends, exchanging information. Ri taught Bruce the proper mechanics of the Korean side kick, the round kick, and the reverse turning kick. As a gifted martial artist as Bruce was, he immediately picked up the moves, practiced them, and mastered those kicks, which made him famous around the world. Bruce proved to be a noble friend by introducing Ri to Hong Kong action film industry, which opened the door to Koreans. In no time, the acrobatic spinning and jumping Korean kicks were shown in Hong Kong kung fu movies. Those kicks were taught or directly performed by Koreans, including Hwang In-sik, Hwan Jang-lee, Kim Jin-pal, Kim Bok-man, Ji Han-jae, and himself, Ri Jung-gu. Kim Jin-pal established a HapKiDo dojang in Hong Kong, where he taught the most prominent stars, Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, Carter Wong, and Angela Mao, who obtained their black belts under him. At that time, Kim Bok-man established more than a dozen Taekwondo centers in Hong Kong. So, Korean kicks helped Bruce to succeed in the silver screen, and Bruce helped Korean martial arts to become recognized worldwide. Upon request of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, in 1967, General Choi dispatched 5 Taekwondo instructors to the Taiwanese armed forces. In that way, Taekwondo influence was brought to many Kung Fu stylists whose students later believed that those kicks were Chinese. By the 1970s, Koreans became known as the best kickers in Asia. Although they were only 50 years apart, the movements of Taekwondo were dramatically different from those used by Okinawan Karate. How did that fantastic transformation occur? Let's take a look at that transformation in 6 stages. First, Okinawan Karate. Second, Japanese Karate. Third, Korean Karate. Fourth, Classical Taekwondo. 5, the WTF first stage towards Olympic Taekwondo. And 6th, the 21st century post-martial Olympic Taekwondo. Uchinadi or Toudi, which today is known as Okinawan Karate, was a composite of layers of Kung Fu that had arrived from southern China along several centuries, gradually modified and mixed with local practices by the Okinawans. Each teacher trained his students personally, passing his knowledge on an individual basis. It was frequent that along decades, students would seek instruction from several teachers. Due to its use at the Shuri court, Toudi became essentially a protection bodyguard type of art, not a confrontation system. In connection with kicks, according to Nagamine Shoshin, by the end of the 19th century, in Okinawan Karate there were 3. The 2-level jumping front kick today popularized as a crane kick, a low front kick with the toes, and the sharp side kick to the knee. There are no accounts of any type of round kick. So we are talking about 3 kicks. Other foot maneuvers may have existed, but they were not consistently practiced. Now, the second stage starts when in 1921, Funakoshi Gichin, an Okinawan master, settled in Japan to teach karate. Fellow Okinawans Motobu Choki, Mabuni Kenwa, and Toyama Kanken also established their schools in the main island. Cultural differences between Okinawa and Japan were deep, as Japan had annexed the Ryukyu Islands, which is the archipelago of which Okinawa is the main island, by political oppression in 1872. Funakoshi's group Japanized karate by changing its writing ideograms, and embraced the idea of killing with one blow, comparing hands and feet with samurai swords. Uniforms and ranks were adopted, borrowing them from judo. Repetition of fragments of forms became the basic training called kihon, or kibon in Korean, and they were considered the fundamental roots of skill. Funakoshi's 1925 Rentan Goshin Karate Jitsu book included 6 kicks: a racing front kick to the chin called kyage, the Okinawan double jumping front kick, a crescent scooping inward kick, a knee strike, a side kekomi thrusting kick, which was probably a sideways stomp to the knee, and the kick to the testicles. It is interesting that a front kick to the rear, followed by a knife hand block in Okinawa's Pinan Shodan Kata, was later transformed by Funakoshi into a side kick in Heian Nidan. Decades later, the same exact sequence morphed its style in Korea, and today it is found both in Tangsudo's form Pyongyang Idang Hyong and in ITF Taekwondo's Chungmutul. By 1940, Funakoshi's third son Yoshitaka pushed for dramatic technical changes, including kicking. Kicks multiplied, they were polished, and they became higher. Side kicks were used above knee level, and round kicks with the ball of the foot were introduced as a kind of horizontal version of a front kick but coming from the side. Young Funakoshi was followed by Egami Shigeru and other students in their innovative ideas, taking training to physical extremes. In Japan, stances got longer and streamlined with the idea of maximizing linear power. From our modern perspective, kicks were still relatively short to match the distance of one-step sparring. Now we get to the third stage, which is Korean karate. In Korea, free sparring was introduced during practice, but its mechanics remained largely affected by the basics taken from the karate kata. Sparring and kicking became at least as important as forms in training. Compared to later versions, in this early kicking stage, the kicks were medium in their extension, with the base foot pivot not yet implemented. The roundhouse kick or turning kick was introduced to Taekwondo's first pattern, harang, in 1955. No prior form in karate included a middle or high round kick. It was done at head level in harang in a diagonal 45-degree angle with the ball of the foot, which to these days has been kept in ITF forms. By the mid-50s, neither the reverse turning kick or spinning kicks had been yet introduced to Korean karate or taekwondo, whichever name you choose. Hwang Ki's 1958 book, Tangsudo Kyobon, deserves to be mentioned, as the pictures of his Mudok Kwan members show a particularly advanced phase of Koreanization compared to the photographs of other schools at that time, which still kept much of the Japanese flavor. The kicks of the Mudok Kwan were very different from Japanese karate. Hwang included in his book 12 leg maneuvers and kicks, most of them to the head, including an inward and outward crescent kick, the so-called twisted kick with the outer instep, a far-reaching round kick at a 45-degree angle, and a very extended side kick with an arched back, which was completely new. The Koreanness, so to say, of those kicks can be appreciated in their fully pivoted base foot, an extreme alignment and the extension of the body, and an obsession with the height of the kicks. By the way, this Mudok Kwan school is a so-called Tangsudo Korean karate school whose instructors wear a dark-trimmed jacket. It is the school where years later Chuck Norris, Cynthia Rothrock and Jean-Claude Van Damme, as well as my own teacher, would learn their kicks. The fourth stage is the golden era of kicking, where classical taekwondo is born. At this point, the tendencies found in Mudok Kwan were already generalized in all taekwondo and tang soo do groups. None of them looked like Japanese or Korean karate. There were three influences for these changes to occur: chest guard contact sparring, military training, and martial art interbreeding. The first championships at the Korea Taekwondo Association involved wearing chest guards and allowing full contact kicks to the head with punches only to the torso. This has never changed since that time. The body armors, called bogu in Japanese and hogu in Korean, had been used in Japan in the late 1940s, borrowed from kendo. Particularly, they were used in the training circle of Korean residents at the Kanbukan under the influence of Toyama and Mabuni sensei. Among the karate black belts of the group was Yoon Kwe-byung, who took armor sparring to Korea and continued its development, founding the Jido Kwan. Another Korean of that group was Choi Young-i, better known as Masoyama these days, who would stay in Japan and later become the founder of Kyokushin Karate. He also adopted Hogu sparring for a while, until his group got rid of the chest guard and kept the idea of no punches to the face with full head kicks allowed. The Japan Karate Association, dominated by the students of Funakoshi, rejected full contact armor sparring, while Koreans adopted it massively. This brought changes, leading to a side-facing fighting stance, added mobility, and extended kicks. And the coaches became creative. The sideways forward-led concept is very important under the idea that you are putting your longest weapon, the side kick, against your opponent's closest part. The side kick is not only the longest but also the strongest. If you manage to make your side kick fast and precise, you will have found an extraordinary tool, and so the Koreans did. Sparring combinations replayed the one strike, one kill conception of the Japanese with the overkill, because Koreans are always willing to spend an extra bullet. The military were also interested in improving the effectiveness of Taekwondo for their troops in Vietnam, so the sparring experimentation was being watched closely and almost being led by the army. This brings up to Nam Tae-hee, a hero in Alex Gillies' book, among others who had Chungdogwan origin and had joined General Choe's group. The military would not trust anything but real contact sparring. Taekwondo instructor and General Woo Jong-lim took up the leading role. It was in Vietnam where Taekwondo and HapKiDo influenced each other. HapKiDo's kicks had been developed to a great extent by Ji Han-jae and Kim Moo-hong in the late 50s. Other great pioneers such as Hwarangdo founder Lee Ju-bang should be mentioned, although I'm keeping the story as short as possible. Those new HapKiDo kicks were completed by 1961. Ji, who is considered the founder of modern HapKiDo and became famous as one of Bruce Lee's rivals in the Game of Death movie, had Taekyon background. Ji Han-jae later made adjustments to the Taekyon kicks he had learned, particularly the passing through spinning heel kick, which foot sweep version is also found in Chinese Kung Fu and was already being practiced in Huang Qi's group. But that was a spinning sweep, not a head kick with the heel. There is a great story around the design of the spinning back kick. Actually, two stories involving two legendary martial artists with whom I had the chance to meet and train. Ji Han-jae, who became famous fighting Bruce Lee in the Game of Death and is considered the leading master in HapKiDo, and Pak Jong-soo, one of the most iconic of ITF Taekwondo pioneers. Ji Han-jae states that there were no spinning kicks in Taekyon, or at least in what he was taught, and that he created the spinning kick. In Mark Tedeschi's HapKiDo book, there is an interesting interview in which he takes credit for that. Let's see. He says, "The spin kick has an important meaning. The true spin kick is only executed with the right leg in one way. I will tell you how I developed this idea. In the Bible, the book of Joshua, Joshua and his followers circled the city of Jericho 7 times. On the 7th rotation, the people shouted in unison, causing the city to fall. The number 7 is also found in many other types of natural circular phenomena, such as the speed of electricity or the Earth's rotation. I read Korean Taoist books and found almost the same story. Clockwise circular motion focusing power and energy like a whirlpool or a tornado. I decided to apply this principle to martial arts technique. However, you cannot do this with the hand. That is why I created the spin kick. Then the principle works. While I'm turning, I pull his mind. In 1/100th of a second, I make my opponent a dummy. Then I kick him here." And G points to the temple. "It is only for killing. And that is why I made the spin kick. It is mine." Pak Jong-soo is the other extraordinary martial artist who has been credited with the creation of the spin kick. He was a student of Nam Tae-hee and one of the first of Korean champions. He was the first in Taekwondo circles experimenting with this technique. Park was a training fanatic searching to improve his arsenal, and he came up with this spinning round kick which he had never seen in Korean karate groups. General Choi pressed wanting to add new techniques to Taekwondo, and Park practiced this technique day and night and polished it until he could perform it flawlessly. General Choi called this kick the reverse turning kick. HapKiDo brought training ideas to Taekwondo and vice versa. For example, Kim Sang-guk, who had trained at the Mudok Kwan, then became a student of Jongdok Kwan's head, Eun-kyu. He recalls being an incredibly dangerous fighter with his sliding sidekick. Kim Sang-guk was a second-generation HapKiDo instructor as well as a Jongdok Kwan member, one of the many connections between HapKiDo and Taekwondo. By that time, a group of Mudok Kwan instructors, led by Hong Jong-soo, who is my Mudok Kwan great-grandfather, joined the Korea Taekwondo Association and thus brought the Mudok Kwan perspective into Taekwondo. The presence of a rather strange twisted kick that was a slap to the outside with the instep, not a particularly dangerous kick, a typical Taekyon move, can be found in early Mudok Kwan and HapKiDo. It shows a convergence and makes us wonder about the connection between Mudok Kwan and earlier Taekyon, which so far has been dismissed by most authors. By the early 60s, exhibitions of both martial arts were showing exactly the same acrobatic jumping kicks not previously seen in neither karate nor Taekyon. Going back to more combat-usable kicks, between 1955 and 1960, Taekwondo developed the spinning sidekick, not previously known either in karate nor in Taekyon or HapKiDo. The sidekick itself had become the jewel of such martial arts advances, a most adequate tool for sparring, self-defense, even breaking hard objects spectacularly. To me, the sidekick is a celebration of the encounter of the Korean agility and practicality and the linear, direct conception of the Japanese. The idea of a direct punch, tsuki or jirugi, which also later became Koreanized, was transferred into the kick, and thus the famous Yopchagi sidekick was born. According to Jido Kwan fighting pioneer Lee Jung-woo, martial artists in China, Okinawa and Japan had been practicing their forms for centuries. So, if Koreans intended to surpass them in the martial arts, they should focus on sparring, particularly through kicking using typical Korean motions. That sentiment was generally accepted by them. The heavy bag became the main training tool for kicks, along with the kwongo or Dalyongo, which is the karate striking post that was used for punches. Downward axe kicks were developed and used successfully in sparring at the dojang and in tournaments, and they were integrated into basic technique. At that point, Korea was a martial interbreeding hub, and by 1970 the Korean art of kicking was fully developed, marking the golden era of Korean kicks. Emigration of Taekwondo instructors during the 60s was coordinated by General Choi's ITF, who was in charge of overseas expansion. Black belts from different backgrounds such as Songmugwan, Changmugwan, Mudokwan or Cheongdokwan blended into the ITF, and school distinctions were not made. When abroad, Koreans focused on planting differences with Chinese and Japanese arts, and in general they conformed a unified front. All Taekwondo and Tang Soo Do groups at that point shared the same basic elements. It was the golden era of kicking, and that meant jumping and doing several kicks before landing. They were so good that they could use those kicks in actual combat. And talking about the golden era, I have spoken about Chuck Norris, Cynthia Rothrock and Van Damme. There was another Mudokwan member who spread quality style Korean kicking abroad. I'm talking about Ernie Reyes, an exceptional American-born Filipino-blooded martial artist who had learned under Dan K. Choi. Reyes learned in California and traveled to Korea to further train under pioneer Ko Eun-min, and made up his way to obtain the third place in the 1977 WTF Chicago World Championships. Reyes established the famous West Coast Demo Team, which in the 80s set a standard for Hollywood martial arts. That included Ernie Jr. as a boy prodigy, as a teenage Ninja Turtle. The fifth stage started when in 1973 and following years, the World Taekwondo Federation decided to promote the country and transform Taekwondo into an Olympic sport. Blocks were replaced by evasions with immediate or simultaneous counterattacks. These changes are said to reflect what's known as the Korean body culture, the fondness of using the legs and shoulders, and they were particularly developed by Ko Eun-min, Lee Kyung-mong, Choi Young-ryul, and Lee Song-guk. New footwork and tactics improved Taekwondo from a sports perspective, and that also helped martial art Taekwondo. The roundhouse kick to the trunk, or turning kick, was replaced by a narrow, fast kick, sometimes called diagonal kick, which is essentially a crossover between the traditional front kick and the round kick, striking with the instep to the abdomen without telegraphing and minimal rotation. The spinning side kick was also replaced by the spinning mule kick. That mule kick was particularly effective to be used as a counterattack and adjust distance at close quarters at the same time. The jumping 360-degree tornado kick was first seen in sparring by then. Although this breed of Taekwondo departed from classical Taekwondo in a proper sense, it was still a martial sport with strong military element. A great number of coaches were Vietnam veterans, and they made sure that the realistic fighting element was there. That was true fighting carried to the point of a Korean art form. That fifth evolutionary stage is what WT people today called old school Taekwondo. That first version of Olympic Taekwondo became very fast, powerful, truly exciting to watch, and many times painful. The number of kicks was reduced, but their effectiveness in combat was very high, and knockouts confirmed the serious nature of that type of sparring. In its 1981 World Championships held in Argentina, General Choi's ITF completely separated from WTF Taekwondo adopting rules that allowed head punching and kicks with foam pads that had been invented by Jun Ri. Although the rules were different, the WTF sparring improvements were brought to ITF competitions, to a great extent by Canada's Paul Germain, an outstanding fighter who combined WTF methods with exquisite timing, aggressiveness, and skill. Germain dominated the art of Korean kicking, using WTF tools, and became ITF World Champion in Glasgow 1984 and 2 subsequent World Championships. Germain's efficient way of applying his awesome kicks immediately spread around ITF in the world, and he became the model to follow. In the Sydney 2000 Olympics, WT Taekwondo was inaugurated as full Olympic sport. Around 1990, the sport had probably peaked, but the pressure of other martial arts trying to achieve Olympic status pressed Koreans to adopt new changes and keep the sport attractive for the general public. Rules were changed, and Olympic Taekwondo's relation with realistic fighting became remote. At one point, just reaching the head of the opponent with a foot in almost any manner scored a point, and punches to the chest didn't. Falling to the floor was not penalized enough, and thus the rules affected martial arts skills very negatively compared with prior versions. New types of movements called scorpion kicks or monkey kicks were adopted. Luckily, they only lasted for a while, but still, Taekwondo had become lost and clueless. At this point in history, I am invaded by a sensation that makes me join Phil Collins and say, how could something so good go so bad? How could something so right go so wrong? Please don't get me wrong. I really like the fact that Taekwondo is in the Olympics, but I don't agree with the direction it has taken in the last 20 years. I am not entirely happy with the Taekwondo version that I see in the Olympics these days. The athletes deserve a better format so that Taekwondo is displayed at its best in terms of technique, speed, beauty, and power. I might play being distanced because I do ITF style, but that's not what Pedro, Master Park, and Master Kim told me. We are all on the same boat. As we have seen, a fantastic transformation of Korean martial arts kicks occurred in just 30 years, from 1945 to 1975. Actually, it wasn't a transformation, but a complete substitution of the kicking ideology that was earlier found in Korean karate. Kicking-wise, Tang-Soo-Do and Taekwondo are not a new variety of karate, but something conceptually different. Full contact sparring was an essential part on how Taekwondo came to exist, along with military training. Using the sport versus martial labels leads to wrong conclusions. Having discussed with senior Korean martial artists over the years, a common factor that I found is their fascination for kicking. These masters judged their peers' martial arts skills depending on how well they could kick. In Korea, there was a direct relationship between how well you could kick and how well you could fight. One of the most respected technicians in HapKiDo and Jungdogwan Taekwondo since the old days, Master Kim Sang-guk, stated that some practitioners improved their standards of performance so high that they became unmarketable for the mainstream. To be entirely fair, the division I make into different kicking generations is just referential. There were martial artists who were very committed to improvement, and thus they kept updating their skills all the time. They were what I would say transgenerational. That is, for example, the case of Kang Soo-jong, arguably the fifth to receive a Jungdogwan black belt from Lee Won-guk in 1947. Although his teacher taught low and middle height kicks that he had learned from Funakoshi in Japan, Kang started to focus on kicking, jumping, and spinning. Kang later entered the military, becoming a combat instructor, and continued being concerned with practical fighting, using power and speed, as it became usual in the 1950s and 60s. At the Jungdokwan, Kang had been senior to Nan Te-hee, who is the co-founder of Odokwan and associate of General Choi. Kang served as ITF Vice President until 1983, and as of the making of this video, he remains as one of the senior-most living Korean Taekwondo artists. During the Korean War, Kang was in charge of training intelligence agents that would make incursions to North Korea. He trained well-known people such as Hee Il-cho, Poo Gil-won, Hwang Kwang-sung, and ATA Songam Taekwondo founder Lee Heng-un. Kang is a perfect example of someone who links the old karate-like Jungdokwan with combative military instruction and the development of high-level Korean kicking skills. Kang condenses in his own life all the milestones of the development of Taekwondo. I hope you liked this video. Sorry it was very long, but I needed to compress the whole history of Taekwondo development in just one episode. If you liked it, please hit the like button, comment, subscribe and share. I will be checking for your feedback. The next episode will be coming soon. And always remember, as martial artists, we have the obligation to keep up our training for a strong body, a wise mind and a caring heart. Take care.